Now, as we get to our final question type that is frequent on the LSAT, that of inference, we actually enter a different world, you might say. We are no longer in the realm of critical argument questions. And if you think about what an inference is, this should make sense. The argument's asking us, in a sense, to draw our own conclusion or to identify a correct conclusion, a well-founded conclusion based on these facts. So an inference question is what we would call statement-based. Although there may be an argument, and in fact there is in this case, we are treating the stimulus now, that opening paragraph, as a set of true statements. An inference question is really much more like reading comprehension type questions you've done on other standardized tests. You read and you draw a conclusion based on what you've read. In that sense, a lot of students find it more straightforward than the critical argument questions, where you really have to kind of poke holes in the logic. But the important note here is that exactly the same stimulus that we've used throughout this process and for critical argument questions can be used for an inference question. But here's the crucial difference. Notice the question stem says, can most properly be inferred if the statements in the argument are true, and that includes the conclusion. That conclusion at the end, after clearly, is no longer a vulnerable, possibly false claim, depending on holes in the argument or whether the assumption is true or not. It is now an ironclad truth. We are to take it really more like a premise. Sentence 1 is true, sentence 2 is true, but also sentence 3 is true. We're now saying, okay, if we accept that the stimulus program did yield a positive effect, what else might be concluded based on that? Now, if you think about the modest versus bold in this type of question, it should make sense, I think, that we're toward the modest end on inference questions, just like with necessary assumption and flaw. You may have seen that on standardized tests before, or had someone tell you, if you're answering like a reading comprehension type question, stay away from language that's too extreme, like always and never, because that's less likely to be true. As I look out my window right now, if I say it sometimes rains where I live, well, something that qualified is obviously true. But if I say it always rains where I live, somebody could just point out the window right now and say false. So we want to stay away from extreme language. And I'll point at choice C most as best demonstrating that. Stimulus programs are the most effective way. Whoever said that they were the most? Way too broad, way too strong in language for what we're looking for. We want something about this particular case that doesn't overstate it. I would say that choices A and B both have a similar issue, and that's back to this hypothetical idea. Do we know what would have happened? What will happen for choice A in the near future? Or what would have happened in the past for choice B? Notice that they're both hypothetical, but A is future and B is past. Either way, though, we don't have enough evidence here to make any sort of claim about what will happen the next time the economy is in recession, or what would have happened if the government hadn't taken this policy on. So we really can't go to those. And then choice E, similar to an earlier wrong answer that we saw, the word proportional is the problem, especially with that in each case. Same thing as in every case. So language too bold here. Proportional suggests that we can set up this concrete and consistent relationship that, they put in $1 million, they got 1% of recovery. Actually, it'd probably be more like $1 trillion, not $1 million. They put in $2 trillion, they got 2% of recovery. They put in $3 trillion, they got 3% of recovery. I'm not an economist, so forgive me if I'm off the scale there. But the idea is it would have to line up in this almost mathematical way that is sweeping and universal. That's too much to say as well. When we're looking for modest language, what's highlighted there in choice D in pink is perfect. At least one other. And then also this idea of causal, which we know relates well to the argument. Let's read the whole answer. If another factor besides the stimulus payments contributed to the economic recovery in question, that factor was accompanied by at least one other causal contributor. That works because remember, the author isn't saying this is the only kind of cause that could ever work or even that worked in this case. The author of this argument is leaving open the idea that there were other positive causal factors as well. D, by making it conditional with if, that's good because it keeps it modest. If that were the case, if there was something else that was also involved, it had to be accompanied by exactly what the author describes here, the stimulus payments, which had a causal effect. At least one other is very modest, and it is referring to the one causal contributor we're talking about in this case. So that really is inferable and must be true. And now you've seen how the same kind of argument, when read well, can then be applied correctly to a number of different major question types on LSAT logical reasoning.